We say often in recovery that healing is a process. But what do we mean by that? What does that statement encompass? Well, I think there's a beautiful passage in Mark chapter 8 that teases some of those ideas out and what it means for us in our recovery journeys.
Recovery can be hard, but it's worth it. There is hope knowing we can find healing one step at a time with Jesus and healthy community. Whether you're struggling with a hurt or a hang-up or a habit, you're not alone. During this podcast, we share real stories, practical tools, and powerful truths that inspire you to keep moving forward. No matter where you are on your journey, there's hope ahead. So stick with us as we walk this path together through Celebrate Recovery.
Well, welcome back to Hope in Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast where we have life change stories and talk recovery conversations that help us move a little bit further down our road of hope and healing and wholeness as we walk with God and others in this journey that we call recovery. I'm grateful to be here with you today. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus. I struggle with anxiety and depression, sexual addiction, and grief. And my name is Andy, and I've got the great privilege of being a part of our Celebrate Recovery staff team here at Fellowship Bible Church of Northwest Arkansas, and grateful for the work that God is doing of bringing hope to hopelessness through the ministry of Celebrate Recovery. Today, I'm excited for our conversation as we lean into what I have heard a lot in recovery is this idea that healing is a process, and what does that look like, and what are some parts of that that might be applicable to me and my recovery journey. Before we jump into our conversation, I just want to always encourage you, hey, if you're getting something out of these, leave a review, drop a like, give us a rating. It actually helps to kind of get the word out about what we do and to help connect people to the same hope that we've found through Celebrate Recovery. Well, like I said, today we're talking about what does it mean that recovery is a process. I wanted to offer a few kind of short thoughts for us today. As I was reading through a part of the Gospel of Mark that I found really interesting. It's Mark chapter 8, and it's a part where Jesus actually heals a blind man. Now, if you've ever read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, one of the things that you've probably noticed in there is how it shows time and time again Jesus healing physical illnesses and physical maladies with people. And one of the reasons why we see Jesus doing that so much is because it's a reminder that Jesus came to heal our hearts and to heal this broken world. And he was displaying his power over that as displayed physically in front of him. And of course, we believe our God can heal physically too. But it's interesting when you look at some of these healing encounters and just the reminder of the power of Jesus to bring healing into our lives. And in Mark chapter 8, there's a really interesting story of Jesus healing a blind man. Most of the time when Jesus heals, it feels like it's an instantaneous thing in the sense that Jesus heals instantly, and there's different interactions with it, and like ways that people respond to Jesus, ways that Jesus leans into people's situations. But this one in Mark 8 is really interesting, and I just want to read it. It's Mark 8:22 through 26, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So it says this, that Jesus and the disciples, they came to Bethsaida. It was a town in Israel, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. And he, Jesus, took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" The blind man, he looked up and he said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village." It's a really interesting passage. What we see in this is Jesus heals a blind man, but it takes a little bit different process than what it normally is. Normally, it's Jesus saying, "Hey, your eyes are open. Go and be healed." But this is a little bit different. We see Jesus coming into a town, and there's some people that knew who Jesus was, and they have this friend, this man that they know that's a blind man. And what we see right at the beginning is that it's not the blind man coming to Jesus and asking for healing. It is the people around the blind man that come to Jesus and beg Jesus to touch him. And I think that's just such a fascinating detail. What it reminds me of is this value of community in our life. This man had people around him that on his behalf went to the healer. They brought this blind man to Jesus and said, "Jesus, would you heal him?" It's just fascinating. We don't get any indication of what the blind man's participation was in that, but there was people around him. And then we see that Jesus took the man and led him out of the village. It actually says that Jesus took him by the hand. You see, in that culture at that time, there was uh, there was an assumption that if there was some sort of physical malady going on with you, whether it's blindness, whether it's lame, you're lame, whether you can't walk, whether you've got leprosy, but there's this assumption that your physical infirmities represented some sort of inward sin, and people that were diseased were not really associated with, but Jesus took him by the hand. What a beautiful insight into the heart of our God, that he sees our brokenness and he takes us by the hand. And then what we see after that is that Jesus led him out of the village. Now, I've never been blind in my life, but I wonder what was going through that blind man's mind. His friends told him that some dude is here, and they brought him to him, and then he meets this dude, this Jesus guy, and Jesus grabs him by the hand and starts leading him away from where he was led to by his friends. He led him outside the village. And then, after, if it wasn't bad enough that Jesus led him into what may have been an unfamiliar place, it starts to get a little weird. Jesus spits on the guy's eyes and puts his hands on his eyes. And then he asks him a question: "Do you see anything?" And it is interesting. It's like Jesus has done this before. Jesus is God. Jesus heals people. This just seems a little weird. Like, I wonder if I was the blind man and I knew what Jesus had done to other people, would I be going, "Hey, Jesus, like, look, I don't mean to critique you, but what you doing here, man? Like, you healed Bob just fine. Why are you spitting on my face, man?" Like, it gets a little weird. It reminds me, the recovery process sometimes feels a little weird. It We get taken to these places that we aren't super familiar with. These places of vulnerability, these places of trust, these places of it, leaning into a process that maybe we don't fully understand. And Jesus goes on, he asks the guy, "Hey, do you see anything?" And this is the first time we actually hear something from the blind man. He looked up and he said, "I see people and they look like trees walking around." Well, first question, how does he know what trees look like? But that's neither here nor there. That is kind of a funny thing. But what we get is, like, Jesus put his hand on his eyes, spit on his eye, like, but his healing wasn't complete. He could see, but it wasn't quite right. And then Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then they were open and restored, and he could see everything clearly. You see, what we see in this is that the healing that this blind man received was not instantaneous. It wasn't something that he initiated, and it wasn't something that had a lot of his participation in. But what it included was a lot of trust. A lot of trust. And we're going to go to a quick break, but when we get back, I want to talk and break down a little bit of that trust in the midst of the process of healing.
Hey friends! A lot of people find the process of starting recovery scary because they aren't sure how to begin or what to expect. The easiest way to get started is simply to get started. Just take that next right step and go to a CR meeting. Every Friday night, we have our Celebrate Recovery meetings at Fellowship Fayetteville and Fellowship Rogers. At 6 p.m., we have a great meal for connection with other recovery brothers and sisters. Then we meet for large group at 7 p.m., followed by open share groups at 8. Same schedule on both campuses, different teachers, different worship teams, but the same great experience. We'd love for you to join us this Friday night. It's never too late to start or start over again. For more information, go to fellowshipcr.org.
All right, we're back talking about how healing is often a process. You know, Jesus met this blind man. He could have healed him instantly, but he didn't. And I wonder why. And I think the answer is when you look at the blind man's participation and his part in all of this. Because at first blush, when you read through Mark 8:22 through 26, you really don't seem to think that the blind man's doing a whole lot. He just shows up, he gets led, and he answers one question. But I actually think there was a lot of trust for this blind man. What did the blind man do? How did he engage in the process? Well, first off, he trusted his friends. And for me in my recovery, it reminds me, do I have trusted people around me that are willing to point out and walk with me in the struggles that I have? That's actually a really important part of the process of healing, is that we can't do it in isolation. We need other people around us encouraging us, walking with us. Sometimes they're the ones that are helping bring us to the healer. They're the ones that are helping us get connected. They're the ones that are helping us stay involved in our open shares and our step studies. They're the ones that are coming alongside us. They're holding our arms up. They're helping us walk this process. And that blind man, he had to trust his friends. There's this guy named Jesus, and he can help. I wonder how long that blind man was blind. It could have been he was blind his entire life. We're told later on in the passage that apparently he knows what trees are, so maybe he went blind later in life. But I wonder how much he might have resigned himself to his situation. You know, that's one of the things that can happen in our recovery. The longer that we walk in our dysfunction, the more resigned we can get to this idea that nothing's going to change. But somebody else had hope on behalf of this blind man. And somebody else's hope helped that blind man stay in the process. So here's the principle. One of the processes of healing is making sure that we have people around us that keep us engaged in the process. The other thing that the blind man did is that he trusted the healer. You see, when Jesus went to take that blind man by the hand, he could have pulled his hand away. He could have said, wait. I need to hear what you've done for others. I need to understand who. He could have raised all of these objections, but he didn't. It says Jesus took him by the hand and began to lead him. You see, leading is what Jesus did, but being led is what the blind man did. Sometimes in this recovery journey, and well, I'll say this, in my recovery journey, one of the things that held me back so much is feeling like I needed to be the one that led and understood and laid out the process for healing. My own best understanding needed to be the thing that laid out what my healing and my journey looked like. I needed to over research it and over understand it and over manage it for it to be over effectual. But the reality is that my best understanding is what led me into recovery in the first place. The blind man let himself be led. But it's not just that he let himself be led. He let himself be led when the going got unfamiliar and when the going got weird. Jesus led the blind man out of the village. I don't know if that blind man was familiar with what outside of that village was like, but it wasn't where he started. And he was going with somebody who was unfamiliar to maybe an unfamiliar place. Recovery, by its very nature, is a change agent, which means it's going to take us to places that maybe we haven't been before. Change requires experiencing something new. And things that are new are unfamiliar. And things that are unfamiliar can feel unsafe, even if they are safe. But what makes an unfamiliar place safe to walk in? It's the one that's leading us in that place. You know, when I see this image in Mark 8 of this blind man being led by Jesus, the verse that comes to mind is out of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 31:8. We've talked about it before on the podcast. But it says this, that the Lord himself goes before you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. So do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. You see, faith never knows where it's being led, but it knows and loves the one who's leading it. That was something that Oswald Chambers said years and years ago. And I think it's so true for us today that our faith, our trust, it's not in knowing where the road leads, but our faith is found in the one that's leading us on the road. And then sometimes that road takes some turns that we're not expecting. Like Jesus spit on this dude's eyes and rubbed his hands on him. I don't know about you, but if I would be sitting there, I'd be going, what is happening? Like, what is going on? Sometimes the recovery process feels like that too. That, man, I'm not sure I like this step. What is this inventory thing? What's this forgiveness thing? Man, I'm not sure if I'm all in for the daily inventory lesson. You know, there is there are things that are uncomfortable that we walk into this process. But oftentimes it's our comfort zone that'll kill us. But when we allow ourselves to get out of our comfort zone, we actually allow ourselves to get into a place of growth. Now, Jesus works in the midst of the things that are weird and uncomfortable for us. And what happened for the blind man is that after he engaged and trusted and experienced something he wasn't expecting, there was a measure of healing that he had. He started to be able to see, but he couldn't see clearly. As we get into this recovery process, there can be a temptation that just because we see better than we used to, we can assume that we're healed. But Jesus isn't just after partial healing for us. He's after progressive, complete healing in our life. See, when we get into recovery, and we start to get out of that cycle of insanity, we start to see things just a little bit more clearly. But that doesn't mean we've got the full picture. Just because we've written our inventory doesn't mean that we've shared it and fully organized it. But there's healing that happens in every step of it. And now we see where the blind man starts to engage. Jesus says, do you see anything? He said, yes, but it's not quite what I thought it would be. People look like trees. And it's just a funny line in the passage. I just love it. But when the blind man says, Jesus, it's working, but I need more. Jesus doesn't go, all right, man, you'll have to come back next Tuesday when I got a slot for you. Jesus puts his hands on him again. He leans in. You see, Jesus is faithful to stick with us in the process as we stay engaged in the process. We've got a God that is so for us that he's going to keep leading us and opening our eyes and restoring us. And Jesus finished the work. And I find it interesting too. Jesus sent him home saying, don't go into the village. And it's interesting that means that the village wasn't the man's home. And Jesus didn't want him to go back to that place that he was. Now, we know in the Gospels that one of the things that Jesus is doing here is that he's trying to keep why he came here a secret during this part of his ministry, because he wasn't ready to let the whole cat out of the bag yet. But it is interesting, that idea of don't go back into the village. Sometimes we experience healing, but we want to go back to those old familiar places. We start to get into this place of confusion and compromise and complacency. But Jesus encourages us to live out your healing. Jesus wants to restore us back to what we were designed for, which is living in relationship with him. And sometimes when discouragement comes, when things happen in our life, we may want to go back to places that aren't good for us. But Jesus encourages us that we don't have to go back to those places. Again, in this part of the recovery in this part of the gospel here, Jesus may be telling this guy, hey, I don't want people to know this, but it is interesting. Don't go into the village. Are there ways that I've been trying to go back into the village that Jesus has already led me out of? It's an interesting thought. Jesus could have healed this guy right away. But you know what? He chose not to. Jesus could heal us instantly if he wanted to. But I think what I see in this blind man is what Jesus wants to develop in us. Trust. Because as we work our recovery more and more and more, one thing that Jesus is going to continue to whisper to us is, do you trust me? Will you let me lead you? Will you let me push you out of your comfort zone? Will you tell me what you need me to do? And as I bring healing, will you trust me and don't go back to the places I've led you out of? Recovery is a process. But I would also add that it's a decision followed by a process. And that decision is the decision to lean in to the invitation of Jesus. In Matthew 11:28-30, I love this passage so much. Jesus says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus invites us to bring our stuff to him. He's not scared of it. He already knows it. And he really does want to help us find healing and hope in him. If you're listening to this today, watching this, I want to thank you for being here with us. And I want to encourage you, if you're in a place where you're struggling, there is a place for you to find healing and hope and restoration. Celebrate Recovery meets every single Friday night at Fellowship Fayetteville and Fellowship Rogers. We would love to see you there. We would love for you to come and find the people that are going to help point you towards the healer, that'll stick with you in the process, that will remind you of the nature and the character of our Savior, our higher power, who can and does pull us out of the things that have held us back for so long. You're not alone in this journey, and we would love to get a chance to connect with you in it. We hope to see you sometime soon. Celebrate Recovery any Friday night, 7 o'clock. Fellowship Rogers or Fellowship Fayetteville. Forever family, we love you. Thanks for listening today.